I work with Sennelier, Opera Hue, Alizarin Crimson, Cadmium Yellow Light, Phthalo Blue, and Cobalt Blue. You can use any professional grade of watercolor paint. I'll be using a liner brush, flat brushes, round brushes, and a water spritzer bottle for all 4 Cat Vibe portraits. So, I start out by joining Opera with Cad Yellow to have Opera, Yellow, and Orange. Then, Cad Yellow with Phthalo Blue Green shade to get green. Then, I wet the top of Penobscot's head with clear water. After letting the water dry back a bit, it loses its sheen. Then I apply bright reds, yellows, and oranges wet on wet. I do this while I'm looking at my reference photograph of Penobscot, and I paint the light up to mid-value shapes that I'm seeing. I do not take out a tiny brush and paint little individual cat hairs. Here's a great technique that artists use. Look at your reference photograph. While you're looking at it, squint your eyes really, really hard. Really squint. With that done, you can see the basic value shapes, but you won't see or focus on individual cat hairs. But you will see values, different values, and I like to call them value shapes on your subject, and in this case, Penobscot. With these oranges, Opera Hue, yellow, I'm definitely painting value shapes. And I'm making an arched value shape above Penobscot's right eye by pulling off paint with a dry brush. Now, with his ear, I'm going a little beyond light to mid values. These are getting pretty close to the other side. They're darker values. And you can see I like to vary not only the value, but the color, the different colors of red that I'm using within this value shape. An aesthetic decision, but it makes for an interesting and expressive painting. Just a wee bit of purple or lavender at the base of the ear there. Here I go again. I'm pulling off paint with a thirsty brush to create some lighter highlight shapes. Some cool and warm colors inside his ear. The cool being yellow and green. That green is the phthalo blue and the yellow. And then the warm is the opera mixed with a little cad yellow. And I'm loosely following the value pattern that I see in the reference photograph, but I'm certainly not doing any copying of the photograph. It's just very impressionistic. Just a few strokes to get the area underneath his eyes painted in. Now I'm mixing some violet, some blue. There might have been a little green in there. It's kind of a grayish color for a little long triangular shape of fur underneath Penobscot's cheek. That subtle contrast between values below his cheek area and the white fur above on his cheek is really going to help delineate it and then really bring out the three-dimensional quality of the head. Now I'm starting Penobscot's mouth and also the darker shadowy area where his cheek is against the surface that he's lying on. Notice that shadow area has been broken up a little, just to give the illusions of a few whiskers or the illusion of his fur. You don't want it to be a straight line. And now I'm painting the upside down triangular pink cute little nose. And now I'm painting that darker area that begins at the tip of that triangle and goes right into the mouth. That sloping mouth that makes cats look so serious. I like to move around my paintings and not concentrate so much on one area. So now I'm working on Penobscot's back. An artist likes to go around the entirety of the painting to see how everything fits and relates to each other to maintain a unified look in terms of both color and value. Now I'm feathering the border between his dark hair and his white breast hair. Again, not lots of little stripes with a small brush, just very loose, casual, and impressionistic. I'm painting in a little orangey color now in this area to unify that part of the cat with the orange on his head. With a wet, clean brush, I'm going back into that feathered area and kind of loosening it and joining some of those stripes together. It just gives a better effect, and it's not so what I call hard-edged, stripy. How's that for watercolor lingo? Now I'm painting in what's going to be a slightly lighter wash above that darker triangle below his muzzle. Again, I'm following the value pattern that I see on the photograph. Now with a flat watercolor brush, I'm going to do the cast shadow on the surface that Penobscot is resting on. I'm using cobalt blue and now a combination of cobalt blue and alizarin crimson to get a little bit of the shadow darker. And a back and forth stroke makes for a nice cast shadow. Plus a little water spritzing, as you saw, to bring down some vertical strokes of paint. But instead of I did it with a brush there, but I can also do it with a spritzer. Little touches of paint here and there. And again, these are little dark areas that I am seeing in the reference photograph. Now I'm painting in with warm colors, some more very light, tea-like consistency values. Now I'm going to do some subtle values on either side of his snout to bring out the dimension and the volume of that area. I'm painting about Penobscot's face with some subtle values that are going to aid in bringing out more of a dimension to his face. An aluminum straw to puff on a puddle of paint for a little bit of painterly pizzazz. Hey, try it. You'll like this technique. It's fun. Now here, with a very thirsty, flat, dry brush, I'm pulling out some areas of highlights. I'll often use a flat, dry brush as long as it's not too soft, but a little more bristly for this purpose. A little more darker value underneath the left eye. I found an ancient tube of cobalt turquoise, perfect for Penobscot's opal-colored eyes. And for those eyes, I'm going back to the round brush. His eye is a little lighter on the left-hand side. And the same goes for the other eye. With a phthalo blue green shade and alizarin crimson mix, I go in and paint the darks around those eyes. And this is going to end up being very dramatic. Look at that blue opal eye pop. Wow. I just love how the dark stripe goes right into the corner of the eye. Now I'm going into the right eye. Remember, my mixture is phthalo blue-green shade and alizarin crimson. Now for the pupils. And this is going to make those eyes even more dramatic. Those eyes were so fun to paint. And now time to paint the little nostrils in that cute little pink nose. Now it's time to paint more tiger stripes on Penobscot. The dark stripes are primarily that phthalo blue green shade. A little green I put in there, but mostly phthalo blue green shade and alizarin crimson. And like the entire painting process, I am not copying the photograph. I'm looking at the photograph a lot to see the dark and light value shapes, but I'm not trying to copy these shapes exactly. I'm all about painting the loose impression of things. Okay, now a little slow-mo. I wanted to slow things up so you can see what I'm doing with my brush. I'm pinching it. And by pinching it, I get kind of a sharp knife edge to it. And what that allows me to do, particularly in this case, is I want to get just a few fine hairs going on, just for a little extra texture. I really don't have to do this. I'd still have a fine cat painting without these little hairs, but I wanted a little extra detail. So if I want fine line work, I can do it. You could do it with the tip of your round brush, but you can also pinch your brush and get a nice long knife edge to it, and that comes in very handy. So you'll see it here. A little delicate, tiny spritzing just to soften some of those hard lines up. just to soften the fur. It was a little too much on the hard edge side. More striping and a little more pinching of the brush. Here's a demonstration of my pinching technique one more time. Okay, I call this final stage little detail touch-ups. And you got to be careful because at this point you can really start to overpaint. So every once in a while, stop painting, get away from the painting, give it some distance, look at it, and decide whether you want to stop or not, and not overpaint it. Now I must say, this part that I'm doing right here on the side of his face, this is really important. That's not overdoing it because you can see it's really popping out his head. So, not quite done yet. As I'm doing these final touches, you can see my palette. I've got greens on it. I've got that dark color made with phthalo blue and alizarin crimson. I've got reds. I've got some yellows. I just flip back and forth, but those colors on my palette are always at the ready. Making another knife blade and a little softening with the water spritzer. Getting close to the end, a few touch-ups on Penobscot's ear. Okay, I'm going to use some white chalk markers and maybe a yellow chalk marker and a flat brush to bring this painting of Penobscot to a conclusion. I'm using a semi-dry flat brush and just the top edge to pull out highlights in the fur. Continuing to pull off highlights with the top edge of my flat semi-dry brush. Most all white chalk markers are filled with a gouache-like medium. So the white actually works like watercolor. You can use a wet brush and soften it and even take it off. So it's great to bring out highlights in areas of your paintings, no matter what the subject. And of course here, I'm doing white whiskers. Now for a few highlights with these brightly colored chalk markers. They're fun. But do use them with a certain amount of discretion. Don't overdo it. I'm using one of the white chalk markers again to put a second layer of white over the previous white markings, like in the whiskers, just to make it a little whiter and more opaque. Sometimes you have to do that. Yahoo! Penobscot is a done deal. Now it's your turn.